Hi, everybody.
Thank you, Professor Gothard. This is Kati Gothard, and wow, that was an amazing lecture. This is, of course, the QA Science After Lecture podcast. This is our fifth episode now, and we're here with students from the Honors College who are taking a course, as well as local teachers who teach middle school and high school here in our community. We're just here to have a conversation and kind of ask you questions. I'm going to start off by, I think, sort of a reactionary question. What you said at the very end of that lecture, there was you really looked ahead of what you want to do, and I think I really appreciated that. You kind of called your shot. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm going after. I couldn't help but think when you were talking there of where you think maybe in 5 years with this work, what are some things that you are hoping to sort of establish? And it'll be interesting to maybe talk with you again in 5 years, but where do you think you'll be 5 years or any arbitrary time?
This is a dangerous question because I don't know how to answer it briefly, but I'll try. But first, let me say how grateful I am that the teachers are here. I receive in my lab high school students, undergraduate students, and graduate students, and what I get is what you make. And I'm grateful for those of you who are encouraging students to look at science and don't be afraid of it, don't approach it, be open-minded, and come to it with the awareness of their ignorance and the excitement of the finding. And if I had to start that, by the time they come to me, it would be too late. So it's all your work, and I'm grateful. Now, where I'm going with this, I believe deeply that this world would be a better place if we understood how that positive loop happens, how we become vulnerable, honest, truthful, compassionate, empathic to each other. I want to understand where that comes in the brain. And I have a chance through this project, the touch and looking at the areas of the brain where these mental states come from. I would like to find a way to look at these deeper, more complex functions of the brain. And I want to understand where are the pieces where this breaks down. What happens in the life of a child who develops an attachment disorder. It cannot attach to others, it cannot relate to others. What happens in the life of all of us when all of a sudden we become defensive and we want to retaliate for something that didn't quite hit us in the right place? Why don't we look at somebody who offended us and ask the question, why did this person offend me? They didn't get out of bed to piss you off that day. They are coming to it with something, and we are blind to it. These are the questions that I think can be answered by neuroscience. They are not the most popular questions. It's hard to convince people that you can do hard science to get at these soft issues, but they're not soft issues at all. I think this is what can change the world.
Excellent, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and start with a question. Let's start over here, and then we'll work our way around.
I actually had a question about the hard science and the soft issues, because everything you said sounded wonderful, and it made me ask why nobody has been doing this earlier. Is there a problem with experimental design, or is it that nobody felt like funding something that was literally touchy-feely?
Great question. So, I come from art. I am a very unlikely scientist. I believe that we can get to the truth and to understanding of the world around us in multiple ways. Science is just one of them. I also believe that science, like many other areas of human endeavor, it's conservative. We are holding on to the forts that we conquered, and we want to do the same because it's comfortable. But as a performing artist, I used to dance. You go out there, and you're never comfortable, and you do your best when you're not comfortable. And I think that in science, we have to do that too. We have to go there where it's uncomfortable. There was an Australian physician. I'm sorry, I have post-hoc amnesia. I can't remember his name. And he said that ulcers are not caused by vagus nerve misfunction that causes stomach acid excessive, but it's a bacterium. Helicobacter pylori, a bacterium that causes stomach ulcers. We used to chop up pieces of stomach from people when they had ulcers because we didn't know how to cure those little holes in their stomach. And this guy was ostracized, laughed at, ridiculed, until nowadays nobody bats an eye that ulcers are coming from a bacteria because he was not conservative, because he didn't go where everybody wanted to go. Do you think everybody is excited about my work on touch with monkeys? No. But there were experimental design issues, and my grants didn't go through, and I'm struggling. But then some people from the National Institute of Mental Health said, we're going to give you some funding to continue this because this is so out there. Nobody else does it. So there's always a way. You just have to know that when you're trying to do something that it's non-conventional and you're not following the flock with the sheep in front that has the bell in its neck, you're going to have a harder time. I chose this, par for the course. I'm happy that I have this resistance because I know that I'm doing something innovative.
Jerry.
So I was kind of wondering, you mentioned about the the brain of the heart that was recently discovered. Do you think there could be any new medical things to come out of that, to prevent or stop diseases?
Yes, I think this is a great question. So we know very little about these nerve cells in the heart. But we know that one of the things that these nerve cells most likely do is coordinating the rhythm of the heart. Now, let me tell you something. If you're in the emergency room and a patient comes with a big infarct, a heart attack, there's one way to know whether that patient will live or die by the morning. If the heart beats regularly, the patient will die. If the heart beats irregularly, a little faster when the patient inhales, a little slower when the patient exhales, which is a natural arrhythmia called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, that patient will live. The rhythm and the coordination of the breathing with the heart rhythm is done by the vagus and is done by these neurons inside the heart. They sometimes do bad things like atrial fibrillation and arrhythmias and things. And what do the cardiologists do? They go in and they burn that. They burn it out with you. You're trouble. You're causing the arrhythmia. They're basically burning out the guys that are regulating this coordination between breathing and rhythm, which is part of heart health. And of course, you have to do something about atrial fibrillation. You have to do something about arrhythmias. But maybe burning them out, it's not the way to go. Maybe listening to them is the way to go. Something else that is pertinent to your question. I think it was done in New York City, where people have this implanted defibrillator. Some people who are at risk of their heart stopping or going into arrhythmia, they have this implanted defibrillator, and then there's a little computer senses that the heart is not doing something right, and bang, it gives a big shock to the heart. The patient obviously notices it. But at the same time, a little signal goes out to the doctor's office and says, so-and-so patient has been defibrillated at 7 p.m. on Tuesday. And then they ask the people, what happened to you in the hour before, the day before, and the week before your defibrillator went off? And you know what happened? They were angry. 700% increase in feelings of hostility and anger and frustration that caused in these people the arrhythmia that caused the defibrillator to go on. So there is this incredible communication between the brain and the brain of the heart that knows and goes into arrhythmic and crazy rhythm patterns, that knows that you're angry. We need to understand more about it. It will be a way, understanding the language will be the way to prevent these angry people from dying of a fatal tachyarrhythmia, which means an arrhythmia where the heart goes so fast that it kills you.
Excellent. Let's hand the mic back over here. We'll kind of go back and forth. Go ahead, Sophia.
So I've had some experience with rhesus monkeys, and I've always found them to be foul. And in your lecture, you talked about how excellent they were for your studies, and I was wondering if, well, first of all, if you have them from very early childhood, so they're raised in a more humane environment, and also if perhaps monkeys in other places are behaving terribly because of environmental stimulus, and that the species isn't as hostile as it often seems?
I think this is a great question, and I'm very grateful that you asked that question, because one of the most sort of controversial aspect of my work is the work with these animals. So the macaque society is a strictly hierarchical, despotic society. In the monkey societies, not just monkeys but apes too, they live in societies. There's a continuum between egalitarian, the bonobos are like that, which are great apes, and even some monkeys, like the capuchin monkeys, are a little more egalitarian. And then on the other end are the despotic societies, where there's no mercy, and the rhesus macaques are on that end. I respect that. I understand that. I never take personally their foul behavior. They do what their species organization and evolution put into their repertoire. They have to do that because it's a brutal society. No two monkeys are ever equal. Somebody's dominant, somebody's subordinate. And I understand where this is coming from. I don't take it personally, but in the same time, they are incredibly intelligent and they understand social relationship. So I take them typically before they reach adulthood, because during teenage years they push the boundaries of the hierarchy, and that's when I can show them I'm boss. But I'm not a despotic boss. This is the kind of boss that one has to be with a rhesus monkey. I want you to do this. If you do it and cooperate, you get rewards. We both will obtain what we want. If you don't do it, I can't punish you, but I'm not making your life easier. You're still gonna have to obey to these rules. And I find them doing something good, anything, so that I can reward them. And the moment I can reward them for something that they legitimately can do again for another reward, they understand the game. It is up to us of how we respond to this aggression. Sometimes I have to give them a dirty look. Sometimes I have to tell them no, but they understand that. I think it's like a child. It's like anybody else. What we do to them conditions of how they're going to respond. Are there impossible rhesus monkeys? Yes. I've had them too, but they're a minority. Most of the time, you can work with them. It takes a lot of time, and it takes your ego out of the picture. When you walk into the monkey colony, your ego has to stay outside the door. And I find that it works for me.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to follow up. What parts of humanity do you see in those rhesus monkeys? Because we had an interesting discussion today in our honors class about how humans tend to want to one-up each other at all times, a game that we're constantly sort of at play with in the most nuanced ways. And it seems like this is pretty explicit in this culture. The one-up is, I'm going
That's
to
their
issue
job.
a beat down, right?
That's their
Yeah.
job. So absolutely, if you look at a lot of if you strip down language and clothing and different things of human civilization, the core of that behavior, we have it. Most of the time, unfortunately, we behave like rhesus macaques. Sometimes rhesus macaques behave better than we do. We share this, but we don't have to lie down to these darker sides of our making. We have to rise up to the more beautiful parts of our making. If they can feel empathy, if they can take care of each other, if they have friendships, if they stand up for each other, why can't we? Why do we treat each other as competition? Why do we treat each other as groups of good people and bad people? There are no good people and bad people. In a good situation, in good conditions, in good training situation, you bring out the best of people, and they're going to look like good people. And if you oppress them, and if you make the situation to be a zero-sum game, you bring out the darker side, and then they're gonna look like bad people. Of course, there are exceptions and there are extremes, but most of the time we have to be aware of the macaque in us. It's there. It's there in all of us. We have to look in the mirror, recognize the macaque, and say, but I have a bigger brain. I can think abstract thoughts. I can plan things out. I understand the end of my life that they don't do. So how can I justify to be mean and unempathetic and selfish and up each other up? One, or whatever that idiom is.
Excellent. Jacob.
So I wanted to bring it back to the talk about the heart acting almost like a brain, and how many neurons are firing from the brain to from the heart to the brain, even compared to the brain to the heart. Would that make, if that's the case, would that make like the hand or like the fingertips a brain, or am I confusing?
No, it's
Terminology.
exactly the same thing. It's a great question. Well, of course, this is the whole point about this idea of embodied cognition, that our brain extends into our body. Absolutely. Your fingertips have the highest density of tactile receptors, of touch receptors. They are so exquisite that they can make the difference between my hair and, let's see, somebody who has rougher hair. Not too many, maybe yours. Kind of a thicker hair. It's incredible. It's exquisite. It's incredibly finely tuned to knowing how the physical environment is. But in the same time, I orient it. I move my body and extend that fingertip to the parts of the environment that I want to learn things from, or the one that I want to interact with and act on. So in some ways, the fingertips are an extension of our brain. They're very tightly connected to our brain, and our brain moves them around according to our agenda. Moves them and puts them where those fingertips have to be for us to learn the most about the environment and for us to interact with that environment in a meaningful way.
Over here. Who's got the mic over here? Was there someone? Yeah, Alessandro, go ahead.
So during the lecture, you mentioned the example of an attachment to the aortic nerve, alleviating symptoms of depression and epilepsy and such. What are some other possible medical applications you think for your research?
So I do not implant these devices in these animals, but I think this is exactly the kind of implication. So I don't test these devices, but I think this is exactly the kind of implications that this research can lead to, and especially work with rhesus monkeys because they have a large enough brain where we can actually listen in, or we can combine, we can interface it with a computer, and the brain computer interface will come sooner or later. Our brains will be hooked up to computers one way or the other. Right now they're just hooked up to these stimulators, but sooner or later we're going to be sooner or later, the way we have a prosthesis for a broken limb, not a broken, but an amputated limb, and we have these artificial limbs. At some point, we're going to be able to have a prosthesis for memory, for example. I think that this is where these applications will involve equipping the brain with artificial intelligence, with bionic components that will allow it to do something that can no longer do because of a stroke or a tumor or some pathology, or maybe to enhance things in a way in which it's not possible today. Maybe we could see more colors and understand the world in a different way. I would like to design devices that would improve our social interactions. Probably a little more complicated than seeing color, but that's the future. That's where we're going.
Maura, go ahead.
This is actually kind of building off of his question, but I was really interested when you said you built that robot that had a coded functioning amygdala. So in addition to like using these processes and research to like better the brain, would it be possible to code an entirely functioning human brain from scratch based on that amygdala coding?
Based on that amygdala coding, not quite. But why can't we be bold and imagine an incredible future where we could actually download a brain into a computer? The interesting question is, we can download vision, we can download a lot of stuff. But see, how are we going to download feelings? How are we going to download personality, temperament? In fact, I think this is where the whole point of this embodied cognition comes from. Because what you're driving to is the brain in the vat experiment, right? You can just make a big computer program and put it into a robot and you can have a whole brain. But what about the fingertips that are extension of the brain? What about a heart? What about the gut bacteria? How are we going to program that? So my whole point here is that the brain in the vat, it's a non-starter for an experiment, for an imagined future. We need the body. The body is the way in which the brain interacts, in which the brain knows a lot of things. We know and understand things, even if it doesn't reach our awareness. How are we going to test the computer program? What is it and what it isn't aware of? It's far. It's not impossible, but it's very far. It's one of those galaxies that not in my lifetime, maybe in yours.
All right, we'll kind of go back. Vimran, why don't we hand the mic there? We'll kind of go back and forth. Annie, you can go next. We'll work it back.
So at the beginning of your talk, you said that you were going to use the words brain and mind interchangeably. Do you believe that there is a difference? And if so, can you explain that?
So the brain is an actual organ. It's a physical thing. It has parts and pieces that do this or do that, and they interact with each other, and there are communication highways between it, and it has blood vessels and glial cells and a bunch of stuff that is in your face material. The mind is a function. It's an emerging property. is something that emerges from the brain, but it's not something that I can take, chop it out, take a piece out, and see how it works without that piece. I can do that with the brain. So the mind is more of a property, a function, something that emerges from the functioning of the brain. And I am not an authority on this. People have spent careers writing about that. I think I should stay in my domain.
I did find it interesting, you said in the talk, you made a comment about sort of implying it's curious that we have this feeling of things happening to us and
Yes.
things we do.
Yes.
And those boundaries are very interesting.
Yes.
Could you maybe comment a little bit more on that with respect to your research and your expertise?
So I think that the mental functions, for example, the way my fingers determine the texture of this bottle, or the force with which I hold this bottle is determined because I feel that there's some compliance and there's some slipperiness. I am not aware of those computations. Those computations take place in my brain, but I have no idea. There are many, many functions similar to this that take place in the brain, but we're not aware of it. We just see the tip of the iceberg. All these important computations that we just take for granted. The brain figures it out for us. I mean, think about it. You're driving and talking or listening to the radio. It's unbelievably complex. You have to take in all the information. You have to listen to your car. You must to feel a bunch of things. And in the same time, you're listening to NPR, right? It's incredibly complicated. We had no idea that this is all going on in this dark box that nobody's looking at and it's not visible. In the dark there, things are sorted out and are computed, and we don't know that. So now, how does this relate to things happening to us or us being responsible? As I said, we are clueless. All of this computation flies under the radar. You actually have to meditate a lot and do mindfulness meditation, and so to even start to be aware and know that you have a body and do a body scan, and it's effortful, seriously effortful to just know and be aware that this happens. And then when things happen to us, when diseases occur, we have this idea that this came out of the blue. So, for example, you get the flu. While the flu virus is around, you didn't get your vaccine, good for you, you got the flu. But when you get the flu, it has to make you think. How stressed were you? How overworked were you? How many conflicts did you repress and didn't want to think about it? How badly you breathe because of the position of the work when you're overworked. The flu comes, but it doesn't make everybody sick. It doesn't even make you sick the same way every time, because your mind is in a different place, your stress is in a different place, your immune system is a different place. We contribute to this. But we can't follow the whole domino sequence, but we contribute to this. People who have anxiety disorders, people who are not in touch with their bodies, they're more likely to go to the emergency room for all kinds of symptoms. They're more likely to have all the so-called functional disorders. When you look at it in an MRI, you do a CT scan, you do this and this, and you see nothing wrong with that organ, but yet that organ hurts and it malfunctions. Why? It's not physically damaged, but it malfunctions because this brain-body loop, it's misaligned with the brain and it's misaligned with the other bodies. We do that.
Yeah.
Consciously or unconsciously, most of the time unconsciously. Health is harmony. It's not perfection. It's harmony. And that harmony can be very quickly disrupted by attributing the wrong cause to a particular phenomenon and running to the emergency room to get a drug for this or get a drug for this or, for God's sake, to get surgery.
Excellent. Let's go to Annie. You've got the mic.
Yes.
So with this, as you're speaking about kind of this holistic approach to health, are there any steps that you take in your day-to-day life in keeping yourself healthy when there's always the option to just go get prescriptions? What do you do and how do you find that balance?
I became very interested in mindfulness and meditation, and I'm trying. I'm very bad because my mind runs off into all kinds of places. And typically what the mind does is that you think, okay, now I'm going to align my body and think about my breathing and just center in here. And then a thought occurred that happened a while ago that makes you anxious that you can't change anymore. It's done, but nevertheless you're wallowing in that misery. Or your mind goes in the future and worries about something that there's nothing to be done about it right now, but you worry about nevertheless. And then what you have to do is to be compassionate and understanding with yourself and say, that's what my brain is, this is its job, come back to my breath and stay there as long as you can. And then it's going to go away again. Then you bring it back again. And the goal is not health. The goal is the practice. The goal is to stay in that practice and watch yourself, watch your brain, your mind going away and bring it back. And I find that exercise both beautiful and frustrating. Frustrating because every time I think next time I'll be better, and I'm not. Just as bad as the beginning. But the practice is important. I can't tell you that this makes me healthier, but at least it makes me aware and it gives me empowerment that I'm doing something that I think it's important for all of us to do.
Let's go over here. Thank you. You can hand that mic back over there.
So I'm a human anatomy phys teacher at a high school. And then on the side of that, I have a huge family background of mental illness. Is there a repair mechanism, kind of like this is when you're hangry? Have you heard that term?
Yes.
Hangry? So you feed yourself and then you feel
Yes.
better because
Yes.
you want some food. Is there a repair mechanism for mental illness? Do you think that we could somehow, you were talking about inflammation and schizophrenia, is there something there?
We don't know enough. We don't know enough. But let me give you something interesting, by the way, schizophrenia. A patient received, a person who had some, I'm not exactly sure about the diagnosis, so I don't want to make it up on the spot, that needed a bone marrow transplant. And he received a bone marrow transplant from a schizophrenic donor and became schizophrenic. And there is another patient who was schizophrenic, needed a bone marrow transplant, received a bone marrow transplant from a non-schizophrenic donor, and schizophrenia went away. Yes, there are only 2 cases, not randomized controlled trials. We can't just bone marrow transplant people with schizophrenia. But it raises the question, where is schizophrenia coming from? It makes you think, just the way anxiety and depression can come from your gut microbiome, why couldn't schizophrenia come from your bone marrow? I'm not saying it does. I am bringing these extraordinary cases up to raise the possibility that mental disorders are not necessarily a problem of the brain. It could be a problem of the body that we're unaware of. Something else. People with Parkinson's disease. You guys know what Parkinson's disease is. The dogma is that after 80% of the dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra die off because of a neuroinflammation or neurodegeneration, you start to have symptoms of Parkinson's disease. It so happens that people who looked at voice production and speech production and vocal cord issues that happen to have historical data on the speech patterns and the vocal coordination of people, they found and reported that vocal behavior changes 10 years before any symptoms of Parkinson's disease will appear, and those symptoms are predictive. The vocal changes are predictive of Parkinson's disease. At our university, there is a faculty, a colleague of ours, Lalita Matavan, who's culturing skin cells from Parkinson's disease patients. And she looks at these cultures, and the cultures from the skin cell of a Parkinson's disease patient, the cells grow completely differently. They're skin cells, and they know that this person has Parkinson's disease. So I don't think that this division between mental disorders and physical disorders will be tenable even in the next 10 years. We gotta drop this division. This is where the Western philosophy and the Western medicine and Descartes and all of them did the damage, because we bought hook, line, and sinker that there is the mind and then there's the body, and the two do not communicate, and mental disorders are these dirty things that we don't talk about, and the other disorders are the dignified disorders. You can have a heart disease, you can have lung disease, kidney disease, everybody will feel sorry for you. But if you have a mental disorders, you're responsible, because after all, you're in charge of your mind. This is damaging. This is terrible. This is a terrible way to be compassionate and understand people who suffer. And it's even more terrible for science and for medicine and for the way we take care of people, because this is an artificial division that is wrong, just wrong.
Thank you. So, Hudmanah, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, how does normal communication between the brain and body differ from when we act based only on reflex?
There's a lot, as I said, there's a lot going on without our awareness, without our command, without our control. You can't will your reflexes, you can't make them come, you can't make them go away. But you can modulate them. If you are anxious, you're going to startle. Your startle response will be a higher amplitude to the same stimulus than if you're not anxious. If you're nauseous, you are going to respond with more disgust to the same stimulus, even if it's not in the gustatory kind of consumatory domain, but maybe social disgust. So all these reflexive things are going on, and they are carried out by virtue of these low-level reflex pathways, but they're almost never independent of the mind, never independent of your mental state. Sometimes we can't elicit a reflex, a knee-jerk reflex from a patient, and then we tell them to do this. Pull very hard between their hands, and all their mental focus goes into this, and then all of a sudden you can get the reflex. Yeah. So reflexes are automatic, all right. There are even behaviors that are semi-automatic, like walking or running or breathing. It's reflexive. You don't think about it, but you can think about it, and you can stop breathing for a while, or you can change the breathing pattern. So even the reflexes are in a closed loop with the mind.
Would you hand the mic back to Noor? She's been waiting. Go ahead.
So I know this was brought up a few questions ago, but I know you briefly touched on neuroinflammation, and I just wanted to get a deeper understanding about why it happens and how it actually affects the brain or the body to the point where a mental disorder could be the result of that.
I am not an expert on this. I am a consumer of this literature just as you are. It's fascinating. It's very interesting. There's more to inflammation than what we thought before. And clearly there's much more brain inflammation than we thought. And the brain inflammation doesn't happen only in this acute phase, like you have a viral encephalitis or herpes encephalitis. But chronic states of inflammation. It may originate from somewhere else in the body. It may be a reaction to something that happens in the brain. It's fascinating. I'd like to know more. I'm not an expert. Maybe you and I should start to read some more literature on this.
Great. Let's go back and get some people. Kim, I want to hand that back to Kim, and then hand the mic. Yeah, Michelle, you got it. Okay, Kim, go ahead.
Thanks. So kind of at the end of your talk, you had mentioned that touch belongs in education, and I was wondering, as teachers, maybe if you could expand on that for us, or maybe more broadly, how the body-mind connection could be used in education.
That's a great question, and I'm not an expert, but I can give you a couple of things that I thought about. So I think that this societal fear that teachers would abuse the students if they touch them, that is so wrong. How many teachers? Yes, there are some exceptions. There are always exceptions. There's only 1 out of 10,000 that will do that. But really, that's what we need to focus on. That's the reason why we need to deprive kids of a hug when they do well, when they need that. This is why we have to turn teachers into robots, fearful that the parents or somebody is going to worry that they go out of bounds. I think if you ask somebody to do something and you touch them on the shoulder, they're more likely to do it, even if they're reluctant to do it. This is science, they're data. I think if you pay attention to what their bodies do, as a teacher, you may know that your particular student X knows the answer to the question. And then you ask the question, and then that student goes into a completely unpredicted behavior, responds with anger, reluctance, or doesn't respond at all. Does something completely unpredicted. But your thoughtful, careful, deep understanding of the patterns of that student. Maybe he's hungry. Maybe a herpes virus is multiplying in his brain, and tomorrow he's going to have a cold sore. Actually, when that virus is multiplying in our brain, we're stupid. Again, there's data for this. We are stupid. I can tell you from personal experience. Sometimes, I can't think straight about this, and the next day, I got a cold sore. People have actually researched this. And when that virus is multiplying, there's inflammation in the brain. And then during that inflammatory state, your mind doesn't work the right way. So you can always assume that something is going on in their body, especially teenagers. They're sleepless. They shouldn't come to school until 10, 11. Their sleep cycle is completely changed. I know it's inconvenient for you because you would have to start to work at 10, 11, and when would you finish and when would you go home? But they don't need to sleep. They can't sleep because of the hormonal changes in their bodies until midnight. And then they have to sleep 8 hours. And then they have to dilly-dally, and they have to listen to their parents saying, brush your teeth, put your clothes on, and then do the things that you need to do, and then go to school. So they're off on their sleep cycle. Things are happening to their bodies that they don't understand and they're not used to. They are, in different nutritional states. There's always going to be something that's happening in their bodies that is going to condition the way they respond to the challenges that you pose them in the class. I think that people who work with teenagers are heroes. They're as hard as rhesus monkeys, if not harder, because they talk back.
Excellent. Let's go 3 more questions before we do. Michelle, why don't you go ahead?
So I know you talked about circular causality and how the mind affects the body and how the body affects the mind. So I wanted to ask you about kind of like a negative version of that. Like what happens when you have a negative thought and it affects your body in a negative way, and then that affects your mind in a negative way, and it's kind of like a loop. So how would you get out of that?
How do you get out of that? Well, I'm glad you acknowledge that those things exist. Most of the time, this is what happens. I think goes back to our discussion about awareness and meditation. I think we need to get into the habit of being aware of what goes on in our mind. I watched some of the lectures of John Kabat-Zinn, who established this mindfulness stress reduction program. And he asked something, how many people are with you in the shower? Well, people in the shower, they prepare their day, they look forward to stressful situations, and they talk a little bit in their mind to the people with whom they expect to have some friction and conflict, and they go into that negative state, and then their body is going to feel in a different way, and then they go back into that negative state. How do you interrupt it? You interrupt it exactly the way you interrupt your mind running in different directions when you're trying to focus on your breath. Awareness of what happens in your mind. It's effortful. It has to get we have to get into the habit of being aware that I have these thoughts. These thoughts are temporary. I'm caught in a loop, in a negative loop. It's not good for me, it's not good for the people that I interact with. But the first step is to be aware of it. I think the moment we are aware of it, we have made a huge step towards changing it. I agree, changing it will be hard, but without knowing that it's happening, we're completely powerless.
Thank you. Let's go to Kat here first. Go ahead, Kat.
Okay. Do you think that it would be more efficient to interrogate criminal suspects in comfy chairs?
Would it be more conducive of truth if we interrogated criminals in comfy chairs? Why not? Yes, I think anything that would, if the goal is for that person to come forward, I think yes. And I think that there are actually tricks that the professional people know of how to get to the core of a person and have them tell the truth.
You know, it's interesting because we are starting to pay a lot of attention in our undergraduate education here about creating environments that is comfortable for students to learn in, some of the collaborative learning spaces that some of my students who are in. And do you think, I'm assuming you think that the space, the comfort can open the mind up in ways to be open to wiring the brain, which we might call learning. Yeah.
Yes. I think the most important feature of comfort is no distractions. And our world is incredibly, strongly pushing against that. So if I had my cell phone here, even if it was face down on this table, our discussion will be more superficial. And the answers will be more superficial. This is a big problem about comfort. We think that we can listen to music and do a mental task like study. Forget it. It's not happening. There's no distributed attention. It's a myth. The only way you can both listen to music and do your homework if you multiplex. For a little time you pay attention to the homework, then you switch the music, then the homework, then the music. How efficient is that? How many deep thoughts are going to come from that? I think we don't realize how stressful distractions are. How stressful the noisy environment around us, all the electronic moving things and cameras. We think that information is good all the time. It's not good all the time. It distracts you from your own mind, from your own thoughts, from your body, from everything that is essential, and you just become this little butterfly going from one colorful flower to the other, and never stopping to think. I think the most important thing about comfort is for you not to have signals from the body that are distracting, such as a real hard chair for many hours, but also not to have distractions. And if I were to be asked, how do you design a learning environment, I would make it conducive to thinking, to deep thought, to being lost a little bit. No distractions. We don't need to always be aware of what's out there. It's really important to be aware of what's in here. And if we listen to our own thoughts, we really have clever thoughts. We have great ideas, but we never got to think about them because something else comes in and captures our attention.
Yeah. So true. All right, let's go with one more question. Sophia, go ahead.
So, in the interest of getting better at listening to our own thoughts and our own bodies, I know through meditation and through specific sports and such, humans have the ability to strengthen our communication with like our muscles or our breathing. And I'm wondering if we can heighten our ability to be aware in the other direction when the signals aren't going out but are coming back. Is there a way that we can train ourselves to better understand what's happening in our body through the receptors that are within us?
Yes, I am absolutely convinced that there are. I'm absolutely convinced that just as the way you can be very sensitive to something that you're studying and investigating and you put a lot of time to gain expertise in. There are people who are experts in 14th century furniture. They looked at a lot of furniture to become experts, and others are experts in, I don't know, any kind of expertise. We acquire that expertise by exposing ourselves to it and allowing the brain to develop networks that start to differentiate and see even subtle differences through time and practice. I believe there's absolutely no difference between that and the practice of becoming aware of your own body. It just needs time, insight, practice, and we can get better at it.
And with that, let's thank Kati.
Thank you.
Well, we've got one more. We'll see everybody next week with Professor Anna Dornhaus when we talk about intelligence. So thanks again. I'll see everybody next week.